Chapter 1. The night before the hour, the winter night draped itself over RAF Woodbridge like a velvet curtain, heavy with silence and the sharp bite of December frost. It was Christmas night, 1980, and the Suffolk air carried a stillness that seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself were waiting for something to happen. The sprawling military base, nestled on the edge of Rendlesham Forest, hummed faintly with the subdued rhythm of a holiday evening. Most of the personnel were off-duty, gathered in barracks or nearby villages, sharing stories over pints or wrapping gifts for loved ones. But for those on the night shift, like young airman Alex Harper, the quiet was both a comfort and a subtle unease. A whisper in the dark that something was not quite right. Alex, barely 22, pulled his heavy coat tighter around his shoulders as he patrolled the perimeter of the base. His boots crunched softly against the frozen grass, each step echoing in the vast emptiness of the night. The sky above was a deep indigo, speckled with stars that glittered like shards of ice. A faint mist curled through the air, weaving between the skeletal silhouettes of the trees that bordered the forest. Alex's breath puffed out in clouds, illuminated briefly by the dim glow of his flashlight as he swept it across the chain-link fence. The beam caught the glint of frost on the metal, sparkling like a secret only the night could keep. He had been stationed at Woodbridge for just under a year, a fresh recruit in the United States Air Force, assigned to this quiet corner of England, where the Cold War felt like a distant murmur. The base, shared with the British RAF, was a hub of activity during the day, jets roaring, drills running, voices shouting orders. But at night, especially on a night like this, it felt like the edge of the world. Alex liked the solitude, the way it gave him space to think, to dream of home in Ohio, where his mother would be setting out cookies for his younger siblings. Yet tonight, the solitude felt different. It pressed against him, heavy and watchful, as if the forest itself were staring back. "Harper, you still awake out there?" The crackle of his radio broke the silence, and Alex fumbled to answer, his gloved fingers stiff from the cold. "Still here, Sarge," he replied, his voice low, but steady, all quiet on the Eastern Front. Sergeant Mike Callahan's chuckle came through the static. "Better be. Don't want you dozing off and letting Santa sneak in with a Soviet spy in his sack." Alex grinned, shaking his head. "No Santas yet, just me and the trees. Keep it that way. Check in at 0200. The radio clicked off, leaving Alex alone. Again with the night, he continued his patrol, moving along the fence line that separated the base from the dense expanse of Rendlesham Forest. The trees loomed tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in a breeze Alex couldn't feel. He had heard stories about the forest from the locals and the nearby pub tailies of ancient spirits, of smugglers' ghosts, of strange lights seen flickering through the trees. He'd laughed them off, chalking it up to rural folklore, but tonight, those stories seemed to linger in the air like the mist. He paused, shining his flashlight into the darkness beyond the fence. The beam cut through the fog, revealing nothing but twisted branches and shadows that seemed to shift just beyond his sight. Alex shook his head, scolding himself for letting his imagination run wild. It was just the cold, the late hour, the eerie quiet of a holiday night. He turned to continue his route when a faint glow caught the corner of his eye. It was subtle, a soft pulse of light deep within the forest, like a candle flickering behind. A curtain. He froze, his heart giving a single heavy thud. He swung his flashlight back toward the trees, but the glow was gone, swallowed by the dark. "Get a grip." "Harper," he muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. He stood still, watching, waiting for the light to reappear. Nothing. Just the endless black of the forest, the distant hum of a generator from the base, the faint rustle of leaves. He was about to move on when it happened again, a brief amber flicker, this time closer, moving slowly between the trees. It wasn't the steady beam of a car's headlights or the predictable flash of a signal light. It was alive, almost, weaving through the forest with a purpose that made Alex's skin prickle. He reached for his radio, his fingers hesitating over the button. What would he even say? That he saw a light? Callahan would laugh him off, tell him to lay off the Christmas ale. But the light pulsed again, stronger now, a warm, reddish hue that seemed to hum with an energy Alex could almost feel in his bones. He pressed the radio button. "Sarge, this is Harper. You got anyone else out here tonight, near the east perimeter?" A pause, then Callahan's voice crackled back. "Negative, Harper. Just you and the owls." "Why?" Alex swallowed, his eyes fixed on the light. It was moving again, gliding smoothly, almost gracefully through the trees. "I'm seeing something, a light in the forest. Not sure what it is." Another pause, longer this time. "A light? Like a flashlight? Poachers, maybe?" "Not a flashlight," Alex said, his voice quieter now. "It's single quotes says ... different, moving weird." "Weird how?" Callahan's tone shifted, a hint of curiosity cutting through his usual GRUFFNES . Alex didn't know how to explain it. The light wasn't just moving, it was dancing, darting between trees, then hovering, as if it were watching him as much. As he was watching it, "I don't know, Sarge. It's not normal. Should I check it out?" "Hold your position," Callahan said sharply. "I'm sending Burroughs and Peniston to your location. Don't move until they get there." "Copy that," Alex replied, his eyes never leaving the light. It pulsed again, brighter, then dimmed, as if teasing him, daring him to follow. His pulse quickened, a mix of fear and fascination tightening his chest. He wasn't sure what he was looking at, but every instinct told him it wasn't poachers or lost hiker. It was something else, something that didn't belong in the quiet of Rendlesham Forest. Minutes dragged by, each one stretching into eternity as Alex stood frozen, his flashlight beam trembling slightly in his grip. The light in the forest flickered. Again, closer now, and for a moment, he thought he saw a shape, a faint outline, metallic and smooth, glinting in the glow. His breath caught, and he took an involuntary step toward the fence, his boots crunching loudly in the silence. The light seemed to respond, flaring briefly before retreating deeper into the trees, as if inviting him to follow. "Harper." The shout broke his trance, and he turned to see two figures approaching, John Burroughs and Jim Peniston, their faces half lit by the glow of their own flashlights. Burroughs, stocky and intense, gave him a quick nod, while Peniston, older and more reserved, scanned the forest with a frown. "What have we got?" Burroughs asked, his voice low, his eyes already searching the trees. Alex pointed toward the forest, his hands steady despite the knot in his stomach. "There, it's moving. Reddish light, maybe amber. Not a flashlight, not a car, something else." Peniston's frown deepened as he followed Alex's gaze. For a moment, the forest was still, the light gone as if it had never been. Then, like a heartbeat, it pulsed again, brighter, closer, weaving through the trees with an eerie grace. Burroughs let out a low whistle. "What the hell is that?" Peniston didn't answer. He reached for his radio, his voice calm but urgent. "This is Peniston. We've got an unidentified light source in Rendlesham Forest, East Perimeter. Requesting permission to investigate." The radio crackled, and Alex felt the weight of the moment settle over them. The forest seemed to hold its breath again, the air thick with anticipation. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just a light. It was a mystery, a question mark glowing in the dark, and Alex knew, deep in his gut, that this was only the beginning. Chapter 2. Strange lights in the woods. The night air grew colder, sharper, as Alex Harper stood at the edge of Rendlesham Forest, his breath forming fleeting clouds in the dim glow of his flashlight. The strange light they had seen moments ago flickered again, a pulsing amber heartbeat deep within the trees, teasing the edge of their vision. John Burroughs and Jim Penniston stood beside him, their faces edged with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. The radio crackled with static, and after a tense pause, the voice of the base commander came through, clipped and authoritative. "Penniston, you're cleared to investigate. Proceed with caution. Report any findings immediately." Penniston clipped the radio back to his belt, his jaw set. "All right, boys," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of anticipation. "Let's see what's out there. Harper, you're with us. Stay sharp." Alex nodded, his pulse quickening. He wasn't sure if it was the cold or the unknown that made his hands tremble slightly as he adjusted his grip on the flashlight. Burroughs, ever the bold one, was already moving toward the gate in the chain-link fence, his boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. "Let's move before that thing decides to take off," he said, his tone half joking, half serious. The gate creaked as Penniston pushed it open, the sound swallowed by the vast silence of the forest. Beyond the fence, Rendlesham loomed like a living thing, its trees standing sentinel in the dark, their branches weaving a canopy that blocked out the starlight. The mist hung low, curling around their ankles as they stepped into the forest, their flashlights cutting narrow beams through the fog. Alex's heart thudded in his chest, each step deeper into the woods, amplifying the sense that they were crossing a threshold, moving toward something that didn't belong in their world. "Keep your eyes on that light," Penniston said, his voice low, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. "And stay close. We don't know what we're dealing with." The light flickered again, brighter now, weaving through the trees about 100 yards ahead. It wasn't steady like a lantern or erratic like a fire. It moved with purpose, gliding smoothly, pausing as if aware of their presence, then darting forward again. Alex's mind raced with possibilities: poachers, a downed aircraft, some kind of experimental tech from the base, but none of them fit. The light was too fluid, too alive, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to hum in the air, a vibration he could almost feel in his bones. Could it be a chopper crash? Burroughs muttered, his flashlight sweeping the underbrush. Maybe one of ours went down. "No wreckage," Penniston replied, his eyes fixed on the light. "No smoke, no noise." A crash would have lit up the whole damn forest. Alex said nothing, his gaze locked on the glow. It was closer now, maybe 50 yards away, and for the first time, he thought he saw something more than just light, a faint outline, angular and sleek, like the edge of something metallic catching the glow. His breath caught, and he pointed. There, you see that? It's not just the light." Burroughs squinted, his flashlight beam joining Alex's. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice trailing off as the shape flickered, then vanished, leaving only the pulsing amber glow. Penniston stopped, holding up a hand. "Hold position," he said, his voice tight. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket, jotting down quick observations: time, location, description of the light. "We need to document this. Whatever it is, we're not imagining it." Alex's stomach twisted as the light pulsed again, brighter, almost beckoning. The forest felt alive around them, the air heavy with an electric charge that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. His flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering for a moment before steadying. "You feel that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like static, but heavier?" Burroughs nodded, his usual bravado replaced by a wary frown. "Yeah, my radio's acting up too. Keeps cutting out." Penniston tested his own radio, pressing the button. "Base, this is Penniston. Do you copy?" Static hissed back, a garbled mess of noise that made him scowl. "Great, comms are down." The light moved again, faster now, weaving through the trees as if leading them deeper into the forest. Alex's instincts screamed at him to turn back, to return to the safety of the base, but his feet moved forward, drawn by a curiosity that outweighed his fear. The three men followed, their steps cautious but deliberate, the crunch of pine needles underfoot the only sound in the eerie, quiet dot as they pushed deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, their branches forming a tunnel that seemed to close in around them. The light was brighter now, a mix of amber and red, pulsing like a heartbeat. It hovered just above the ground, maybe 10 feet away, and for the first time, Alex could see it clearly. It wasn't just the light, it was coming from something. A structure, small and triangular, no bigger than a car, its surface smooth and metallic, reflecting the glow in a way that made it look almost liquid. Strange markings like hieroglyphs shimmered faintly along its edges, glowing briefly before fading. Holy. Burroughs started, his voice catching. That's no aircraft. Peniston stepped forward, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Stay back, he warned, but his own curiosity pulled him closer. He reached out as if to touch the object, but stopped short, his hand hovering in the air. It's warm, he said, almost to himself. The air around it, it's warm. Alex felt it too, a subtle heat, like standing near a radiator, radiating from the object. His flashlight flickered again, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness, save for the glow of the thing in front of them. The air buzzed with that strange energy, a low hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest. Time felt wrong, sluggish, as if the world had slowed to a crawl. He blinked, and for a moment, he thought he saw the trees bending slightly, their branches curving toward the object like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Harper, you okay? Burroughs' voice snapped him back, and Alex realized he'd been holding his breath. He nodded, unable to find words, his eyes fixed on the object. It pulsed again, the light flaring bright enough to cast long shadows across the forest floor, then dimmed, as if retreating. We need to get closer, Peniston said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. He took another step, and the object responded, its light flaring red, then amber, then white, a sequence that felt almost like a signal. Alex's heart pounded, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare voice. What was it? Where had it come from? And why did it feel like it was watching them? Suddenly, the object moved not with the jerky motion of a machine, but with a fluid grace, gliding silently a few feet to the left, then hovering again. The hum intensified, and Alex's radio crackled to life, spitting out a burst of static that sounded almost like words, though he couldn't make them out. Burroughs swore under his breath, backing up a step, while Peniston stood his ground, his notepad forgotten as he stared at the thing. Base. This is Peniston, he tried again, his voice rising. We've got a craft of some kind. Unknown origin. Do you copy? The radio hissed back, silent except for the static. The object pulsed once more, brighter than before, and then, without warning, it shot upward, weaving through the trees with impossible speed. The light vanished, leaving only the afterimage burned into Alex's eyes and a ringing silence in its wake. The forest felt empty now, the electric charge gone, the air cold and still once more. The three men stood frozen, their breaths coming in quick, shallow bursts. Alex's flashlight flickered back on, its beam weak but steady. Peniston turned to them, his face pale in the dim light. We report this, he said, his voice firm but shaken, every detail. Let's move. As they turned back toward the base, Alex cast one last glance into the forest. The trees stood silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. But deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't over. Whatever they had seen, it had seen them too. And it wasn't done with Rendlesham. Forest. Chapter 3. The first encounter. Forest seemed to hold its breath as Alex Harper, John Burroughs, and Jim Penniston stood in the clearing where the strange object had vanished. The air, moments ago alive with an electric hum, was now heavy with silence, broken only by the faint rustle of pine needles underfoot. Alex's flashlight flickered weakly, casting jittery shadows across the trees, as if the forest itself were reluctant to reveal what it had just witnessed. His heart pounded, a steady drumbeat in his chest, as he tried to make sense of what they had seen, a triangular metallic thing glowing with an otherworldly light, moving with a grace that defied every law of physics he knew. Penniston was the first to break the silence, his voice low but steady, as if anchoring himself to procedure could tether him to reality. "All right," he said, pulling his notepad from his pocket. "We document everything. Now, Harper, Burroughs, what did you see? Exact details?" Burroughs, still staring into the dark where the object had disappeared, shook his head slowly. "It was like nothing I've ever seen. Triangular, maybe 10 feet across. Smooth like polished metal, but it didn't reflect our lights, right? And those markings look like writing, but not any language I know." Alex nodded, his throat tight. "It was glowing red, amber, white, like it was cycling through colors, and it moved. Like it knew we were here. Like it was watching. US." His words felt inadequate, unable to capture the surreal weight of the moment. He glanced at Penniston, who was scribbling furiously, his flashlight tucked under his arm. "Markings," Penniston muttered, jotting down the word. "Describe them." "Like symbols," Alex said, struggling to recall the fleeting glimpse. "Curved lines, sharp angles, almost like hieroglyphs, but they glowed, then faded. I couldn't read them." Penniston nodded, his face unreadable in the dim light. "All right, let's take a closer look at this clearing. If that thing was here, it might have left something behind." The three men spread out, their flashlights sweeping the ground. The forest floor was a carpet of pine needles and frost, undisturbed except for their own footprints. Alex's beam caught something, a faint indentation in the soil, triangular, about a foot across. He crouched, his gloved fingers brushing the edge of the mark. It was precise, too perfect to be natural, as if something heavy had pressed into the earth and then lifted away without a trace of drag. "Penniston, over here," he called, his voice steady despite the chill creeping up his spine. The older man hurried over, Burroughs close behind. They knelt beside the mark, their flashlights converging on the spot. There were 3 such indentations, forming a perfect triangle, each one identical in size and depth. "Landing gear?" Burroughs suggested, his tone half questioning, half disbelieving. Penniston didn't answer. He pulled a small tape measure from his pocket, measuring the distance between the marks. 3 feet apart exactly, he said, his voice clipped. "And look at the soil, it's compacted like something heavy sat here." Alex stood, his eyes scanning the clearing. The air felt different now, not just cold but charged, as if the ghost of that strange hum lingered. His flashlight flickered again, and he tapped it against his palm, frustrated. "My light's acting up. It was fine before we got close to that thing." "Mine too," Burroughs said, shaking his own flashlight. "And my watch had stopped. Look." He held up his wrist, the second hand frozen at 1:47 a.m. Penniston checked his own watch, frowning. "Same here. That's not normal." He stood, his gaze darting to the trees. "Let's keep moving. There might be more." They fanned out again, moving cautiously, their beams cutting through the mist. Alex's mind raced, replaying the image of the object, its smooth, liquid-like surface, the way it seemed to pulse with life. He couldn't shake the feeling that it had been aware of them, not just reacting but observing, as if they were the ones being studied. He paused near a cluster of trees, his flashlight catching a faint scorch mark on the bark of a pine. The wood blackened in a perfect circle, no bigger than a dinner plate. "Got something?" he called, his voice echoing in the quiet. "Peniston." And Burroughs joined him, their faces tense as they examined the mark. It wasn't a burn from a fire, no ash, no charring beyond the precise circle. It was as if something had touched the tree with intense, controlled heat. Peniston ran his fingers over the mark, his expression grim. "This wasn't here yesterday. I bet my stripes on it." He pulled out a small knife and carefully scraped a sample of the blackened wood into a plastic bag from his kit. "We'll have this checked." Alex's gaze drifted upward to where the branches above seemed slightly bent, as if something had passed through them without breaking a single twig. His stomach twisted. "It didn't crash," he said softly. "It didn't even touch the trees, it just moved through them." Burroughs let out a low whistle. "This is getting weirder." By the second, Peniston didn't respond, his focus on the ground, where he found another faint indentation, identical to the first three. "4 marks now," he said, his voice tight. This thing was stable, deliberate, not some random crash. Alex took a step back, his flashlight sweeping the clearing. The forest felt alive again, not with the hum of the object, but with a weighty silence, as if the trees themselves were holding secrets. He couldn't shake the image of those glowing symbols, the way they seemed to pulse in time with the light. He wanted to ask Peniston what he thought it was, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? That they'd just seen something that didn't belong on Earth? The thought was too big, too impossible, and yet it lingered like the afterimage of the light in his eyes. "All right," Peniston said finally, standing and tucking his notepad away. "We've got enough for now. Let's head back, report this to the base. They'll want to know everything." Burroughs nodded, but his eyes lingered on the scorch mark. "You think they'll believe us?" "I mean, this is crazy." Peniston's jaw tightened. "They'll believe what we tell them. We've got the marks, the samples. This isn't a ghost story, it's evidence." Alex wasn't so sure. He followed the others as they retraced their steps toward the base, the forest closing in around them. The mist seemed thicker now, curling around their legs like a living thing. His flashlight flickered again, and he tapped it harder, willing it to stay on. The memory of the object burned in his mind, its smooth surface, its deliberate movements, the way it seemed to know they were there. He glanced back at the clearing, half expecting to see the light return, but the forest was dark, silent, ordinary dot as they neared the fence line. The base's floodlights came into view, a harsh contrast to the soft glow they'd left behind. Alex's heart was still racing, his mind a tangle of questions. What had they seen? Was it some kind of secret military tech, or something else entirely? And why did it feel like the object had chosen to reveal itself to them? Peniston paused at the gate, turning to face them. "Not a word of this to anyone outside the chain of command," he said, his voice low and serious. "We report to the colonel, and we stick to the facts." "Understood?" "Understood," Burroughs said, though his tone suggested he was already bracing for skepticism. Alex nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment he'd stood so close to the object, the warmth radiating from it, the strange symbols that seemed to pulse with meaning. He didn't know what they'd encountered, but he knew one thing for certain. Rendlesham Forest had changed tonight, and so had he. As they stepped through the gate, the forest behind them seemed to sigh, its secrets sinking back into the dark. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they'd seen was still out there, watching, waiting for the next moment to reveal itself. Chapter 4. The Colonel's investigation the night at RAF Woodbridge had grown colder, the frost now clinging to every blade of grass as Alex Harper, John Burroughs, and Jim Peniston trudged back through the gate. their boots heavy with the weight of what they'd witnessed. The forest behind them stood silent, its secrets locked in the dark, but the air still hummed with an unspoken tension. Alex's mind churned, replaying the image of the triangular object, its glowing symbols, and the way it had slipped through the trees like a phantom. His flashlight, now steady, felt inadequate against the vast unknown they had just encountered. At the base, the floodlights cast stark shadows across the concrete, and the hum of generators was a grounding reminder of the world they'd left behind. Peniston led the way to the command post, his face set in a mask of determination. "We report directly to Colonel Halt," he said, his voice low but firm. "No detours, no chatter. This goes straight to the top." Burroughs nodded, though his eyes darted back toward the forest, as if half expecting the light to reappear. Alex said nothing, his thoughts a tangle of awe and unease. The base felt different now, its routine orderliness at odds with the mystery they just uncovered. As they approached the command post, a figure emerged from the doorway. Colonel Charles I Halt, Deputy Base Commander, his expression a mix of curiosity and irritation as he adjusted his cap against the cold. "Peniston," Halt said, his voice sharp but measured. "I hear you've got something unusual. Let's have it." Peniston stood straighter, recounting the encounter with clinical precision. The pulsing light, the triangular object, the strange markings, the indentations in the soil, the scorch mark on the tree. He handed over the plastic bag with the wood sample, his notepad open to show his sketches of the symbols. Halt listened, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the notes, his fingers tapping against the side of his thigh. When Peniston finished, a heavy silence settled over the group. "You're sure of this?" Halt asked, his gaze shifting between the three men. "This isn't some Christmas prank? No one's been at the pub too long?" "No, sir," Burroughs said, his tone earnest. "We all saw it. It wasn't a plane, wasn't a light from the village. It was something else." Alex nodded, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "It moved like it was alive, sir, like it knew we were there." Halt's frown deepened, but there was a flicker of intrigue in his eyes. He was a practical man, not given to flights of fancy, but he'd been at Woodbridge long enough to know that Rendlesham Forest had its share of odd stories. "All right," he said finally. "I'm going out there myself. Peniston, Burroughs, you're with me. Harper, you too. Grab a recorder, I want this documented." Within minutes, they were geared up, Halt leading a small team back toward the forest. He carried a portable tape recorder, its red light glowing as he tested it, his voice crisp as he noted the time to 15 a.m. December 26, 1980. Alex fell in. Stepped behind him, his flashlight sweeping the path, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. The forest loomed ahead, its silhouette darker against the night sky. The mist thicker now, curling like ghostly fingers around the tree's dot as they crossed the fence line. Halt's voice came through the recorder, steady and methodical. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, investigating an unidentified light reported by Airman Peniston's team. Time is 0217 hours. We're entering Rendlesham Forest, east of RAF Woodbridge." The group moved deeper into the woods, following the path Peniston had marked. The air was colder here, the silence heavier, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the occasional snap of a twig. Axe's flashlight caught the indentations in the clearing, still pristine, their triangular shapes stark against the frosted soil. Halt crouched beside them, his flashlight illuminating the marks as he spoke into the recorder. 3 distinct impressions, approximately 1 foot in diameter, forming a triangle. Soil appears compacted, no visible disturbance around the edges. Burroughs pointed to the scorched tree, its circular burn mark glowing faintly under their lights. "That's where we saw it, sir." The object was hovering right here. Halt examined the mark, his fingers brushing the blackened wood. No charring, no ash, he noted, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. This wasn't a fire. Something else caused this. He stepped back, scanning the clearing, his recorder still running. No signs of debris, no fuel residue. Whatever was here left cleanly. Alex's eyes darted to the trees, half expecting the light to return. The forest felt watchful, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. He tightened his grip on his flashlight, its beam flickering again, a reminder of the strange energy that had pulsed through the air earlier. "Sir," he said, his voice low, "our equipment was acting up when we got close. Lights, radios, watches everything." Holt glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "Noted," he said, then turned back to the recorder. "Possible electromagnetic interference reported by the initial team. We'll need to check radiation levels." As if on cue, a faint glow appeared in the distance. Beyond the clearing, a soft amber pulse weaving through the trees. Holt froze, his hand tightening on the recorder. "There," he said, his voice sharp. "Bearing 090 degrees, approximately 200 yards out. Moving light, reddish-orange, intermittent." The team turned, their flashlights converging on the glow. It was the same light Alex had seen before, but now it seemed bolder, less elusive, as if it wanted to be seen. It darted between the trees, then paused, hovering just above the ground. Holt's recorder whirred as he described it, his voice steady but laced with a growing intensity. "Light is moving erratically, no discernible pattern. Appears to be under intelligent control. No sound, no visible propulsion." Alex's heart raced as the light pulsed brighter, then split into two distinct points. One red, one white, dancing around each other like fireflies. The air grew heavy again, that strange electric hum returning, faint but unmistakable. His flashlight flickered out completely, and Burroughs cursed under his breath as his did the same. Holt's beam held steady, but even he seemed shaken as the lights moved closer, now only 50 yards away. "Sir, look." Burroughs pointed upward, where a beam of light white, impossibly bright, shot down from the sky, illuminating a patch of ground near the edge of the clearing. Holt swung his recorder toward it, his voice rising slightly. Beam of light directed downward, approximately 10 feet in diameter, no visible source in the sky. "Ground is illuminated, no heat detected." Alex stared, his breath catching as the beam vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the forest dark again. The twin lights, red and white, hovered for a moment longer, then darted away, slipping through the trees with that same eerie grace. The hum faded, the air growing still once more. Holt stood frozen, his recorder still running, capturing the silence that followed. "What the hell was that?" Burroughs whispered, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet awe. Holt didn't answer immediately. He rewound the tape, playing back his last few observations, his face grim as he listened to his own voice describe the impossible. "We're not alone out here," he said finally, his tone measured but heavy with implication. "Whatever this is, it's not ours?" Alex's mind spun, the weight of those words sinking in. "Not ours." He glanced at Peniston, whose expression mirrored his own mix of fascination and unease. The forest seemed to close in around them, its shadows deeper, its silence more oppressive. Holt tucked the recorder into his pocket, his jaw set. "We head back. This needs to go higher up the chain. And we need to check that ground where the beam hit." As they turned to leave, Alex cast one last look at the clearing. The indentations, the scorch mark, the memory of the lights, they were all that remained of the encounter, but they felt like a promise of something more. The forest wasn't done with them, and deep down, Alex knew they weren't done with it either. Chapter 5. The objects dance. The forest seemed to pulse with a quiet energy as Colonel Charles Holt led his small team, Alex Harper, John Burroughs, and Jim Peniston, back through the dense trees of Rendlesham. The night air was sharp, the frost crunching beneath their boots, but the chill was no match for the electric tension that lingered after the strange lights had vanished. Alex's flashlight, now useless, hung at his side, its beam extinguished by the same unseen force that had silenced their radios and stopped their watches. The memory of the triangular object, its glowing symbols, and the beam of light that had pierced the forest floor burned in his mind, each detail sharper than the last. Holt's recorder whirred softly, capturing every observation as they moved toward the spot where the beam had struck. His voice was steady, a lifeline of procedure in the face of the unknown. Time is 0235 hours, December 26, 1980. Investigating the site of the directed light beam observed moments ago. No visible residue or disturbance noted yet. The clearing was eerily still, the mist curling low around their ankles like a living thing. Alex's eyes darted to the trees, half expecting the lights to return, but the forest remained dark, its secrets tucked away in the shadows. Holt knelt beside the patch of ground where the beam had hit, his flashlight sweeping the soil. No scorch marks, he noted, his tone clinical but tinged with curiosity. No heat damage, no disruption to the pine needles. It's as if the light left no trace. Burroughs crouched beside him, his brow furrowed. That beam was bright enough to light up the whole clearing, sir. Shouldn't there be something? Holt didn't answer, his fingers brushing the soil as if it might yield answers. Alex stood a few steps back, his gaze fixed on the surrounding trees. The air felt heavier now, charged with that same electric hum they'd felt before, faint but unmistakable. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next act in this strange performance. Harper, Peniston, Holt said, standing and brushing the frost from his knees, spread out. Look for anything out of the ordinary more. Marks, burns, anything. Alex nodded, moving toward the edge of the clearing, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The hum grew stronger as he approached a cluster of pines, their branches sagging as if weighed down by something invisible. He paused, his breath catching as a faint red glow flickered in the distance just beyond the trees. "Sir," he called, his voice sharper than he intended. "It's back." Holt and the others turned, their flashlights converging on the spot. There it was, the same reddish light, pulsing like a heartbeat, hovering low to the ground. But this time, it wasn't alone. A second light, white and piercing, joined it, the two weaving around each other in a slow, deliberate dance. Holt's recorder clicked on again, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Two lights now, red and white, approximately 150 yards. Out, moving in tandem, no audible sound. Appears to be reacting to our presence. Alex's heart raced as the lights moved closer, their glow casting long shadows across the clearing. The red light pulsed brighter, then dimmed, as if signaling something, while the white light darted upward, hovering above the treetops before descending again. The hum intensified, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in Alex's chest, making his teeth ache. His radio crackled to life, spitting out bursts of static that sounded almost like voices, though no words were clear. "It's responding," Peniston said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the lights. "It knows we're here." Burroughs took a step forward, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "What the hell is it doing? It's like it's playing with us." Holt raised a hand, signaling them to hold position. "Stay calm," he said, though his own voice betrayed a hint of awe. "Document everything. Peniston, get a reading on that radiation detector." Peniston pulled a small Geiger counter from his kit, its needle twitching as he aimed it toward The light's background levels are elevated, he reported, his frown deepening. Not dangerous, but definitely higher than normal. About 0.1 milliroentgens per hour. Holt noted the reading into his recorder, his eyes never leaving the lights. Radiation levels above background, consistent with an unknown energy source. Lights are now approximately 100 yards out, moving erratically but with purpose. Alex watched, mesmerized, as the lights continued their dance. The red light pulsed in a steady rhythm, while the white light darted in sharp, angular movements, as if tracing a pattern in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being studied, their every move observed by whatever or whoever controlled. Those lights, the object they'd seen earlier, with its smooth, metallic surface and glowing symbols, seemed to linger in the glow. Though it remained just out of sight, a shadow at the edge of perception. Suddenly, the red light flared brighter, splitting into 3 smaller points of light that hovered in a triangular formation. The white light joined them, circling the triangle before shooting upward, disappearing into the night sky. The hum spiked, a sharp buzz that made Alex's ears ring, and then it was gone, the forest plunging back into silence. The red lights lingered for a moment, pulsing faintly, then vanished, leaving only the afterimage burned into Alex's eyes. Holt's recorder clicked off, the silence deafening. "They're gone," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with implication. "No trace, no sound, just gone." Burroughs let out a shaky breath, his flashlight beam sweeping the empty clearing. "That wasn't a flare, sir. No way." "Flares. Don't move like that." Peniston nodded, his face pale in the dim light. "And they don't mess with our equipment." "My Geiger counter is still twitching, even with the lights gone." Alex's mind raced, grappling with the impossibility of what they'd seen. The lights hadn't just moved, they'd performed, their movements deliberate, almost choreographed. He thought of the triangular object, the way it had hovered so close to the ground, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. Was it controlling these lights, or were they something else entirely? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last. Holt turned to the group, his expression grim but resolute. "We need to mark this area," he said. "Peniston, set up some reference points. We'll come back in daylight to check for physical evidence. Harper, Burroughs, keep your eyes open. If those lights come back, I want to know immediately." Alex nodded, his gaze drifting to the spot where the lights had vanished. The forest felt different now, not just silent but expectant, as if it were waiting for the next move in this strange game. He helped Peniston drive small stakes into the ground around the clearing, marking the spots where the beam had struck. And the indentations remained. The Geiger counter clicked faintly, its needle still dancing above normal levels. A quiet reminder that something unnatural had been here. As they finished, Holt spoke into his recorder one last time. "Times 0250 hours. Investigation of unidentified lights and elevated radiation levels concluded for now. Returning to base to report findings." End of entry. The team turned back toward the fence line, their flashlights cutting through the mist. Alex's heart was still pounding, his mind a whirlwind of images, the lights, the object, the hum that seemed to vibrate in his bones. He glanced back at the clearing, its shadows deeper now, as if the forest were reclaiming its secrets. Whatever they had encountered, it wasn't done with them. The lights, the object, the strange energy, they were all part of something larger, something that defied explanation. As they reached the gate, the floodlights of the base came into view, a stark contrast to the darkness they'd left behind. But even the familiar hum of the generators couldn't erase the feeling that they'd crossed the threshold tonight, stepping into a mystery that would follow them long after they left the forest. Alex tightened his grip on his useless flashlight, his thoughts drifting to the lights and their eerie dance. Whatever they were, they had left their mark, not just on the ground, but on him. Chapter 6. Aftermath of First Night. The dawn broke over RAF Woodbridge with a pale, reluctant light, the sky bruised with clouds that seemed to mirror the unease settling over the base. Alex Harper trudged back to the barracks, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his mind buzzing with the night's events. The forest, the lights, the triangular object, they felt like a dream, vivid yet unreal, as if the cold Suffolk air had woven a spell over him. His flashlight, now working again, swung at his side, a silent reminder of the strange interference they'd experienced in Rendlesham Forest. Beside him, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston walked in silence, their faces etched with a mix of adrenaline and bewilderment. The command post was a hive of quiet activity as they arrived, the night shift handing over to the morning crew. Colonel Charles Halt was already there, his recorder on the desk, its tape carefully labeled and stored. He looked up as the three men entered, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp with focus. "Debrief in 10, he said, his voice clipped. "Get some coffee. You'll need it." Alex poured himself a cup from the pot in the corner, the bitter warmth grounding him as he sat with Burroughs and Penniston. The room was small, its walls lined with maps and schedules, a stark contrast to the vast mystery of the forest. Burroughs leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I keep seeing those lights when I close my eyes," he muttered, "like they're burned into my brain." Penniston nodded, his notepad open, his sketches of the object and its symbols meticulous despite the late hour. "It wasn't just lights," he said quietly. "That thing. It was solid, real, and it was watching us." Alex sipped his coffee, his thoughts swirling. The memory of the object, its smooth, metallic surface, the glowing hieroglyphs. The way it moved with such deliberate grace felt like a weight pressing on his chest. He wanted to speak, to spill the questions flooding his mind, but the words felt too big, too impossible. Instead, he listened as Halt began the debrief, his voice steady but laced with an urgency that matched their own. "Last night, at approximately 0145 hours, Airman Harper reported an unidentified light in Rendlesham Forest." Halt began, his eyes scanning the room. "Penniston and Burroughs confirmed the sighting, and we investigated, observing a triangular object and multiple lights exhibiting controlled movement. Radiation levels were elevated, and physical evidence indentations and a scorch mark were documented. I want your full accounts, every detail, no matter how small." Penniston went first, his report precise, almost mechanical, as he described. The object's shape, the symbols, the way it hovered without sound. Burroughs followed, his voice more animated, recounting the light's dance and the beam that had pierced the forest floor. Alex spoke last, his words halting as he struggled to convey the sensation of being watched, the electric hum that had vibrated through him. The way time itself seemed to slow in the object's presence. Halt listened, his pen scratching notes, his face betraying no judgment. When they finished, he leaned back, his fingers steepled. "This stays within this room until I say otherwise," he said, his tone firm. "We'll return to the site at first light to collect more evidence. I've requested a radiation team to verify Penniston's readings. Until then, you're on standby. No discussions outside this group." As they left the command post, the base was waking up, the hum of activity, a stark contrast to the stillness of the night. Alex followed Penniston and Burroughs to the edge of the forest, where a small team was already assembling technicians with Geiger counters, a photographer, and a few MPs to secure the area. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing where they'd seen the object. The indentations were still there, 3 perfect triangles pressed into the soil, their edges sharp and undisturbed. The scorch mark on the pine tree gleamed faintly, its circular precision even more striking in daylight, Henniston knelt beside the indentations, measuring them again, his face set in concentration. "Still 3 feet apart," he said, almost. To himself, no erosion, no weathering. "These were made last night." Burroughs pointed to the ground nearby where the beam had struck. "No marks here," he said, frowning. "That light was bright enough to blind us, but it didn't leave a scratch." The radiation team moved in, their Geiger counters clicking softly. The lead technician, a wiry man named Carter, frowned as he checked the readings. 0.1 millirel engines per hour, just like you said, he told Penniston. "Not dangerous, but definitely above background." Whatever was here left a trace. Alex stood back, watching the team work, his mind replaying the night's events. The forest looked ordinary now, its trees standing tall and silent, but it felt different, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for them to leave. He wandered to the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the ground for anything they'd missed. Near a cluster of pines, he spotted something, a faint burn mark. Not on a tree, but on the soil itself, a perfect circle no bigger than a coin. He crouched, brushing his fingers over it, the earth warm to the touch despite the morning chill. "Colonel," he called, waving halt over. The older man examined the mark, his brow furrowing as he noted it in his log. "Another anomaly," he said, his voice low. "We'll take a sample." As the team collected soil and wood samples, Alex felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The evidence was real indentations, burns, elevated radiation, but it only deepened the mystery. What had they seen? A secret military project? Something from another country? Or something else entirely, something that didn't fit into any category he knew? The questions gnawed at him, each one a thread pulling him deeper into the unknown dot by midday. The team returned to the base, their findings cataloged and sealed for analysis. Halt dismissed them with orders to rest, but Alex couldn't sleep. He sat in the mess hall, nursing another cup of coffee, his eyes tracing the grain of the wooden table. Burroughs joined him, his usual energy subdued. "You think we'll ever know what that was?" he asked, his voice quiet. Alex shook his head. "I don't know, but it wasn't normal. You felt it, right?" "Like it was alive." Burroughs nodded, his gaze distant. "Yeah, and I keep thinking it didn't just show up. It wanted us to see it." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Alex thought of the symbols, the way they pulsed with meaning he couldn't grasp. He thought of the lights, their deliberate dance, the beam that had illuminated the forest without leaving a mark. Whatever it was, it had left them changed. Marked in a way that went beyond the physical evidence dot as the day wore on, the base returned to its routine, but a quiet tension lingered. Whispers spread among the night shift, rumors of strange lights and equipment failures. Halt's orders kept the team silent, but Alex could feel the weight of their secret, a shared bond that set them apart. He lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, the memory of the object vivid in his mind. Sleep eluded him, replaced by a restless energy, a need to know more. Outside, the forest stood silent, its shadows lengthening as the sun dipped low. Alex knew they'd be back. Halt had already mentioned a second investigation if the lights returned. The thought both thrilled and unnerved him. Whatever they'd encountered was still out there, waiting in the dark, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't done with them. The first night had been a glimpse, a fleeting encounter, but the mystery of Rendlesham Forest was far from over. Chapter 7. The second night, 2 nights had passed since the first encounter in Rendlesham Forest, and the air at RAF Woodbridge carried a restless edge, as if the base itself were holding its breath. Alex Harper sat on the edge of his bunk, his eyes heavy from sleeplessness, the memory of the triangular object and its dancing lights etched into his mind. The day had been filled with routine drills, reports, The hum of military life, but beneath it all, a quiet tension simmered. Whispers of the first night's events had spread despite Colonel Halt's orders, and every glance toward the forest seemed to carry a question. Would it happen again? As dusk settled over the base, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple, Alex was summoned to the command post. Colonel Charles Halt stood at the center of the room, his face set in a grim determination. John Burroughs and Jim Peniston were already there, their expressions mirroring Alex's mix of anticipation and unease. A small team of technicians and MPs stood ready, their equipment, Geiger counters, cameras, and a recorder laid out like tools for a battle no one fully understood. "We're going back out," Halt said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced the room. The sightings on the 26th were no fluke. If those lights return, we need answers. Peniston, you're on radiation readings. Burroughs, Harper, you're with me. On observation, we move as a unit and we document everything. Alex nodded, his pulse quickening as he grabbed a flashlight and checked his radio. The memory of the first night, the electric hum, the glowing symbols, the way the object had seemed to watch them flooded back, sharp and vivid. He followed the team out into the cold, the frost crunching underfoot as they crossed the base. Toward the east perimeter, the forest loomed ahead, its trees black silhouettes against the fading light, the mist curling low like a veil over its secrets. Halt's recorder clicked on as they passed through the gate, his voice cutting through the silence. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, December 28th, 1980, 2,200 hours. Investigating reported lights in Rendlesham Forest, east of RAF Woodbridge. Team consists of Peniston, Burroughs, Harper, and support personnel." The forest was darker than before, the air thicker with a chill that seemed to seep into Alex's bones. Their flashlights cut narrow beams through the mist, illuminating pine needles and frost-covered roots. The clearing where they'd seen the object 2 nights ago was unchanged, the triangular indentation still stark in the soil, the scorch mark on the pine tree a silent witness to their first encounter. Peniston knelt, his Geiger counter clicking softly. "Still elevated," he reported. 0.1 milliro engines per hour, same as before. Halt nodded, his eyes scanning the trees. "Keep your eyes open," he said, his voice low. "If it's out there, it'll show itself." They moved deeper into the forest, their steps cautious, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the Geiger counter and the rustle of their boots. Alex's heart pounded, his senses heightened, every shadow a potential sign of the light's return. He remembered the way the object had moved, fluid and deliberate, as if it were alive. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, not from fear but from a strange, almost magnetic pull to know more. Then it happened. A faint red glow flickered in the distance, pulsing like a heartbeat through the trees. Alex froze, his breath catching. "There," he whispered, pointing, same as before. Halt's recorder whirred as he spoke. "Red light observed, bearing 080 degrees, approximately 200 yards out. Pulsing, no audible sound." He gestured for the team to move forward, their flashlights converging on the glow. It was brighter now, a vivid crimson that seemed to pulse with intent. Weaving between the trees with that same eerie grace Alex remembered Dot as they approached. The light split into 3 distinct points, each one red and flickering, forming a loose triangle in the air. A fourth light, white and piercing, appeared above them, hovering like a star that had strayed too close to Earth. Halt's voice grew sharper, his recorder capturing every detail. Multiple lights now, 3 red, 1 white, moving independently but coordinated. No visible craft, no propulsion noise. Alex's radio crackled, spitting static that sounded almost like a voice, though no words were clear. His flashlight flickered, then died, plunging his small corner of the forest into darkness save for the glow of the lights. The air hummed again, that familiar electric vibration that seemed to resonate in his chest. Peniston's Geiger counter clicked faster, the needle twitching higher. "Radiation spiking," he said, his voice tight. 0.15 milliroentgens. Now, Burroughs took a step forward, his eyes wide. "Look at that," he said, pointing upward. The white light was moving in a slow arc, its glow casting long shadows across the clearing. Then, without warning, it shot downward, a beam of light slicing through the trees to illuminate a patch of ground 50 yards away. The beam was precise, almost surgical, its edges sharp against the darkness. Halt's recorder captured the moment, his voice steady but laced with awe. White beam directed downward, approximately 8 feet in diameter. Ground illuminated, no visible heat or disturbance. Light source appears to be above tree line, no craft visible. Alex stared, mesmerized, as the beam vanished, leaving. The forest dark again. The red lights pulsed brighter, then darted away, weaving through the trees with impossible speed. The white light lingered, hovering above the canopy, its glow pulsing in time with the hum that filled the air. It was as if the lights were performing, their movements a message no one could decipher. Alex's mind raced, grappling with the same question that had haunted him since the first night. What were they dealing with? Halt signaled for the team to follow the lights, his flashlight steady despite the growing interference. "Stay together," he ordered. "We need to see where they're going." They moved quickly, their boots crunching through the frost as the lights led them deeper into the forest. The red lights danced ahead, always just out of reach, while the white light hovered above, its glow a beacon in the night. Alex's heart pounded, his senses overwhelmed by the hum, the flickering lights, the weight of the unknown. He thought of the object from the first night, its smooth surface and glowing symbols. Was it out there now, hidden in the dark, controlling these lights? Like a conductor leading an orchestra? Suddenly, the red lights stopped, hovering in a tight formation just above the ground. The white light descended, joining them, and for a moment they pulsed in unison, a silent symphony of light. Then, with a final flare, they shot upward, disappearing into the sky like stars swallowed by the night. The hum faded, the air growing still, the forest sinking back into its heavy silence. Halt's recorder clicked off, his face pale in the dim light of his flashlight. "Lights have disappeared," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "No trace, no debris. Time is 2,245 hours. We're marking this location and returning to base." Alex stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the spot where the lights had vanished. The forest felt empty now, but the weight of their presence lingered, a silent promise that this wasn't over. Peniston marked the area with stakes, his hands steady despite the tension in his face. Burroughs shook his head, muttering under his breath, that was no lighthouse. As they turned back toward the base, Alex cast one last glance at the trees. The forest seemed to watch them leave, its shadows deeper, its silence more profound. The lights, the hum, the strange energy, they were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. But he knew one thing for certain, whatever they had seen was no accident. It had chosen to show itself, and it would return. The thought both thrilled and unnerved him as they stepped through the gate. The floodlights of the base, a harsh reminder of the world they'd left behind, but could never fully return to. Chapter 8. Explanations and Doubts. The morning after the second night in Rendlesham Forest dawned cold and gray, the Suffolk sky heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on R.F. Woodbridge. Alex Harper sat in the mess hall, his hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, his eyes tracing the steam as it curled upward. The events of the previous night, the dancing red and white lights, the piercing beam, The electric hum that had vibrated through the air felt both vivid and distant, like a dream he couldn't shake. Across from him, John Burroughs picked. At his breakfast, his usual energy subdued, while Jim Penniston sat silently, his notepad open to a sketch of the light's triangular formation. The base buzzed with a quiet tension, the routine of military life overshadowed by the mystery that had unfolded in the forest. Colonel Charles Halt had called an early debrief, and the small team gathered in the command post, their faces etched with a mix of exhaustion and unease. Halt stood at the front of the room, his recorder and notes spread out on the table, the Geiger counter readings and soil samples meticulously cataloged. His expression was grim, his voice steady but weighted with the gravity of what they'd witnessed. We've got physical evidence, indentations, burn marks, elevated radiation, Halt began, his eyes scanning the group. We've got multiple witnesses, consistent accounts, and my recordings. But as of now, we're keeping this contained. No discussions outside this room. Understood? Alex nodded, his throat tight. The weight of secrecy pressed on him, heavier than the mystery itself. He thought of the lights, their deliberate movements, the way they seemed to respond to their presence. He wanted to ask what it all meant, but the room's silence held him back. As the debrief ended, word came from higher up the chain of command. The British Ministry of Defense had been informed, and a preliminary investigation was underway. By midday, a team of RAF officers arrived, their faces stern as they reviewed Halt's evidence. Alex watched from a distance as they examined the indentations in the clearing, their expressions skeptical. One officer, a tall man with a clipped accent, pointed to the nearby Orford Ness Lighthouse, visible on clear nights across the coast. Likely just the beacon, he said, his tone dismissive. It's bright enough to cast odd shadows through the trees. Halt's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. The lights we saw were moving, under control, and left physical traces. A lighthouse doesn't do that. The officer shrugged, unmoved. Atmospheric conditions, perhaps, or a meteor shower. The Perseids can be quite striking this time of year. Alex exchanged a glance with Burroughs, who rolled his eyes. Meteors don't hover, Burroughs muttered under his breath, low enough that only Alex heard. Penniston, standing nearby, said nothing, his face a mask of frustration as he clutched his notepad. By afternoon, an official statement was issued. The lights were likely a combination of natural phenomena, lighthouse beams, stars, or atmospheric distortions. The indentations in the soil were attributed to animal activity, the burn marks to lightning or natural fires. The elevated radiation levels were downplayed as within normal fluctuations. Alex listened to the explanation, his stomach twisting with disbelief. He knew what he'd seen, what they'd all seen. It wasn't a lighthouse or a star. It was something else, something that didn't fit into the neat boxes of official reports. Back at the barracks, the team was called to a private meeting with Halt. He closed the door, his expression darker than Alex had ever seen. They're closing ranks, he said, his voice low. The mod wants this buried, and our own brass isn't pushing back. They've ordered us to stand down, no further investigations unless new evidence surfaces. Burroughs leaned forward, his voice sharp. Sir, with all due respect, that's nonsense. We've got evidence, your tapes, the Geiger readings, the marks. We all saw it. Halt nodded, his fingers tapping the table. I know, but orders are orders. We keep our mouths shut and we move on, for now. Alex felt a surge of frustration, the weight of the secret heavier than ever. He thought of the object, its smooth surface and glowing symbols, the lights that had danced with purpose. Sir, he said, his voice quieter than he intended, what do we do if it comes back? Halt's eyes met his, a flicker of something resolve, perhaps, or defiance passing through them. We document it, privately if we have to. This isn't over, Harper, not by a long shot. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine, but the forest loomed in Alex's mind, its shadows calling to him. He couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been part of something larger, something that the official explanations couldn't touch. That evening, he slipped away to the edge of the base, staring out at the dark silhouette of Rendlesham. The trees stood silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, but the air felt charged, as if the forest were waiting for the next chapter dot in the days that followed. The base returned to its rhythm, but the team carried their secret like a shared wound. Whispers persisted among the night shift, rumors of lights and strange noises, but Halt's orders kept them silent. Alex found himself drawn to Peniston's sketches, poring over the symbols he'd drawn, their curves and angles hauntingly familiar yet impossible to decipher. Burroughs, usually so outspoken, grew quieter, his eyes often drifting to the forest during patrols. One night, unable to sleep, Alex sat in the mess hall with a cup of coffee, the base quiet around him. Peniston joined him, his notepad tucked under his arm. "You believe the lighthouse story?" Peniston asked, his voice low. Alex shook his head. "Not a chance. That thing was alive, Peniston. It moved like it knew us." Peniston nodded, his fingers tracing the sketch of the triangular object. "I keep thinking about those symbols. Like they were trying to tell us something. But what?" Alex didn't have an answer. He thought of the hum, the way it had vibrated through him, the lights that had danced as if performing for them. He thought of Halt's recorder, its tapes now locked away, a record of a truth no one seemed ready to face. "They want us to." "Forget it," he said finally, "but I can't." "None of us can," Peniston said, his voice heavy with the weight of their shared experience. "And I don't think it's done with us." As the weeks passed, the official narrative took hold. The Rendlesham Incident, as some began to call it, was dismissed as a misunderstanding, a trick of light and shadow. But for Alex, Burroughs, Peniston, and Halt, the truth was in the forest, in the indentations and burns, in the lights that had moved with purpose. They carried that truth in silence, bound by orders and a shared sense of wonder and doubt. Alex found himself returning to the edge of the forest during his patrols, his eyes searching the trees for any sign of the lights. The forest remained silent, its secrets buried in the frost, but he knew they were there, waiting. The object, the lights, the hum, they were part of something vast, something that had touched them and left them changed. And as he stood at the fence line, the stars above glittering like distant eyes, Alex felt a quiet certainty. Whatever they had seen, it would not stay silent forever. Chapter 8. Explanations and Doubts. The morning after the second night in Rendlesham Forest dawned cold and gray, the Suffolk sky heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on RAF Woodbridge. Alex Harper sat in the mess hall, his hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, his eyes tracing the steam as it curled upward. The events of the previous night, the dancing red and white lights, the piercing beam, the electric hum that had vibrated through the air felt both vivid and distant, like a dream he couldn't shake. Across from him, John Burroughs picked at his breakfast, his usual energy subdued, while Jim Peniston sat silently, his notepad open to a sketch of the light's triangular formation. The base buzzed with a quiet tension, the routine of military life overshadowed by the mystery that had unfolded in the forest. Colonel Charles Halt had called an early debrief, and the small team gathered in the command post, their faces etched with a mix of exhaustion and unease. Halt stood at the front of the room, his recorder and notes spread out on the table, the Geiger counter readings and soil samples meticulously catalogued. His expression was grim, his voice steady but weighted with the gravity of what they'd witnessed. "We've got physical evidence indentations, Burn marks, elevated radiation. Holt began, his eyes scanning the group. We've got multiple witnesses, consistent accounts, and my recordings. But as of now, we're keeping this contained. No discussions outside this room. Understood. Alex nodded, his throat tight. The weight of secrecy pressed on him, heavier than the mystery itself. He thought of the lights, their deliberate movements, the way they seemed to respond to their presence. He wanted to ask what it all meant, but the room's silence held him back. As the debrief ended, word came from higher up the chain of command. The British Ministry of Defense had been informed, and a preliminary investigation was underway. By midday, a team of RAF officers arrived, their faces stern as they reviewed Holt's evidence. Alex watched from a distance as they examined the indentations in the clearing, their expressions skeptical. One officer, a tall man with a clipped accent, pointed to the nearby Orford Ness Lighthouse, visible on clear nights across the coast. Likely just the beacon, he said, his tone dismissive. It's bright enough to cast odd shadows through the trees. Holt's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. The lights we saw were moving, under control, and left physical traces. A lighthouse doesn't do that. The officer shrugged, unmoved. Atmospheric conditions, perhaps, or a meteor shower. The Perseids can be quite striking this time of year. Alex exchanged a glance with Burroughs, who rolled his eyes. Meteors don't hover, Burroughs muttered under his breath, low enough that only Alex heard. Peniston, standing nearby, said nothing, his face a mask of frustration as he clutched his notepad. By afternoon, an official statement was issued. The lights were likely a combination of natural phenomenal lighthouse beams, stars, or atmospheric distortions. The indentations in the soil were attributed to animal activity, the burn marks to lightning or natural fires. The elevated radiation levels were downplayed as within normal fluctuations. Alex listened to the explanation, his stomach twisting with disbelief. He knew what he'd seen, what they'd all seen. It wasn't a lighthouse or a star. It was something else, something that didn't fit into the neat boxes of official reports. Back at the barracks, the team was called to a private meeting with Holt. He closed the door, his expression darker than Alex had ever seen. They're closing ranks, he said, his voice low. The mod wants this buried, and our own brass isn't pushing back. They've ordered us to stand down, no further investigations unless new evidence surfaces. Burroughs leaned forward, his voice sharp. Sir, with all due respect, that's nonsense. We've got evidence, your tapes, the Geiger readings, the marks. We all saw it. Holt nodded, his fingers tapping the table. I know, but orders are orders. We keep our mouths shut and we move on, for now. Alex felt a surge of frustration, the weight of the secret heavier than ever. He thought of the object, its smooth surface and glowing symbols, the lights that had danced with purpose. Sir, he said, his voice quieter than he intended, what do we do if it comes back? Holt's eyes met his, a flicker of something resolve, perhaps, or defiance passing through them. We document it, privately, if we have to. This isn't over, Harper, not by a long shot. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine, but the forest loomed in Alex's mind, its shadows calling to him. He couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been part of something larger, something that the official explanations couldn't touch. That evening, he slipped away to the edge of the base, staring out at the dark silhouette of Rendlesham. The trees stood silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, but the air felt charged, as if the forest were waiting for the next chapter. In the days that followed, the base returned to its rhythm, but the team carried their secret like a shared wound. Whispers persisted among the night shift, rumors of lights and strange noises, but Holt's orders kept them silent. Alex found himself drawn to Peniston's sketches, poring over the symbols he'd drawn. their curves and angles hauntingly familiar yet impossible to decipher. Burroughs, usually so outspoken, grew quieter, his eyes often drifting to the forest during patrols. One night, unable to sleep, Alex sat in the mess hall with a cup of coffee, the base quiet around him. Peniston joined him, his notepad tucked under his arm. "You believe the lighthouse story?" Peniston asked, his voice low. Alex shook his head. "Not a chance. That thing was alive, Peniston. It moved like it knew us." Peniston nodded, his fingers tracing the sketch of the triangular object. "I keep thinking about those symbols. Like they were trying to tell us something. But what?" Alex didn't have an answer. He thought of the hum, the way it had vibrated through him, the lights that had danced as if performing for them. He thought of Halt's recorder, its tapes now locked away, a record of a truth no one seemed ready to face. "They want us too." "Forget it," he said finally, "but I can't." "None of us can," Peniston said, his voice heavy with the weight of their shared experience. "And I don't think it's done with us." As the weeks passed, the official narrative took hold. The Rendlesham Incident, as some began to call it, was dismissed as a misunderstanding, a trick of light and shadow. But for Alex Burroughs, Peniston, and Halt, the truth was in the forest, in the indentations and burns, and the lights that had moved with purpose. They carried that truth in silence, bound by orders and a shared sense of wonder and doubt. Alex found himself returning to the edge of the forest during his patrols, his eyes searching the trees for any sign of the lights. The forest remained silent, its secrets buried in the frost, but he knew they were there, waiting. The object, the lights, the hum, they were a part of something vast, something that had touched them and left them changed. And as he stood at the fence line, the stars above glittering like distant eyes, Alex felt a quiet certainty. Whatever they had seen, it would not stay silent forever.